initiating central control, opening diagonals for bishops, and immediately contesting the d5 square sets a dynamic tone. Developing a knight to f6 immediately challenges white's central pawn and prepares for flexible pawn structures. Developing another knight prepares for castling and solidifies central control, subtly influencing the ongoing pawn struggle. Embracing the fianchetto, black prepares to deploy their bishop actively, influencing the long diagonal and potentially challenging white's central control. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure now aims for a flexible fianchetto setup, subtly restricting black's knight. Developing the bishop to its most active diagonal solidifies the fianchetto and prepares for central expansion or kingside pressure. Solidifying the fianchetto, developing another piece to the queenside, and preparing for castling are all immediate benefits from this logical placement. Safeguarding the monarch by tucking it away into the corner immediately secures the king's safety, a prudent step before launching any major offensive or counterplay. Securing the king's residence against any immediate aerial assault paves the way for central pawn thrusts. Solidifying the center and preparing a pawn advance, this move grants black greater influence over the critical e5 square while aligning the bishop for future activity. Solidifying the center and preparing for further pawn expansion, NC aims to control key squares and link the pieces for harmonious development, particularly eyeing the e4 push should circumstances allow, while also reinforcing the queenside potential. Developing the knight to d7 solidifies the pawn structure and prepares to contest the center, potentially supporting a e5 push later. Preparing for a queenside expansion, white aims to support a future c4 pawn push and potentially create an outpost for a knight on c4. Challenging the central pawn structure, black aggressively pries open lines for a potential kingside assault, while simultaneously creating an avenue for the queen to participate. Initiating the exchange on e5 offers a clear path to simplifying the position and potentially opening the d-file for your rook, aiming to leverage greater piece activity in the center. Opening the center with this exchange creates dynamic possibilities, forcing both sides to consider pawn structure and piece activity in the newly liberated lines. Opening the center with this pawn thrust, white aims to disrupt black's comfortable setup and potentially create attacking opportunities on the kingside, forcing black to react decisively to the new pawn structure. Bringing the rook to the central file, the black player aims to contest the open e-file, a crucial corridor that has emerged after the pawn exchange, and to prepare for potential pawn pushes or piece maneuvering in the center. This repositioning also offers some indirect protection to the kingside if white decides to attack along the g-file. Targeting the queen's flank with the bishop activates a powerful diagonal, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially create weaknesses for a later assault on the queenside, while simultaneously reinforcing white's central control and developing a piece to a more aggressive square. Solidifying the center and preparing for a potential pawn push on d5, this move reinforces the e5 outpost and connects the rooks for future action. Dismantling black's queenside pawn structure opens up diagonal lines for the bishop, aiming to exploit the now potentially weak squares, especially after the pawn exchange. K5 redirects the queen to a more active diagonal, challenging white's bishop on a3 and potentially eyeing the queenside pawns or the c3 knight. This maneuver also clears the d8 square, hinting at future piece development or consolidation. Consolidating control of the central squares and preparing for further pawn advances, this maneuver neatly repositions the queen to a more active, supportive role, eyeing the kingside while simultaneously defending the pawn on d4. Repositioning the rook to a more active file and preparing for potential central pawn advances, this maneuver seeks to challenge white's pawn structure and create dynamic possibilities on the queenside. Expanding the queenside pawn structure offers white more space, but simultaneously creates potential weaknesses on adjacent squares, demanding careful defensive vigilance. The queen provocatively stakes a claim on the queenside, disrupting white's intended pawn advance while eyeing a potential infiltration. a calculated gamble to disrupt black's queenside aspirations, temporarily sacrificing material for an initiative and forcing a reshuffle. Instead of reinforcing the kingside, the queen's excursion to the queenside, though seemingly capturing a pawn, creates a significant overextension, leaving the monarch vulnerable to white's increasingly coordinated pieces. This aggressive pawn grab, while temporarily increasing material, introduces a strategic imbalance, potentially opening lines for a swift white attack and compromising black's central control. Asserting control over the file, this maneuver aims to disrupt black's queen and potentially force concessions on the queenside, while the pieces are still clustered centrally. Black reroutes the queen, seeking a safer haven from the biting bishop on c7, while also preparing to contest the open b-file. This strategic repositioning acknowledges white's spatial dominance on the queen side and attempts to diffuse the immediate pressure, though it sacrifices some tempo and potentially delays development of other pieces for an active role. The queen's new post on e7, while less exposed, also limits its influence on the kingside and the d-file, creating a subtle positional compromise that white might exploit with well-timed pawn pushes or piece activity. Opening the central d-file now offers a commanding avenue for the rook, a strategic commitment that aims to exploit the current static nature of black's central pawns and the slightly exposed nature of the king after its recent shuffling. The knight's journey to e8 signals a strategic regrouping, aiming to challenge white's dominant bishop on c7 and prepare for potential central pawn breaks. This repositioning, while seemingly passive, liberates the d-pawn for future advancement and creates a vital defensive screen for the king. It's a subtle reinforcement of black's structure, anticipating white's further advances and seeking to solidify the position before committing to more ambitious plans. Unleashing the light-squared bishop to a5 aims to create a powerful battery along the a2-g8 diagonal, potentially pressuring black's queenside and preparing further advances, while simultaneously offering a strategic trade that could simplify into a favorable structure for white. The rook's relocation to d6 offers immediate central influence, yet its outpost appears precarious, potentially becoming a target for white's active pieces. Clearing the queen's path for renewed central influence and preparing for a potential kingside attack hinges on this regrouping. Accepting the exchange here sacrifices the highly active bishop on a5, effectively relinquishing white's central control and opening up the d-file for potential black infiltration. Reclaiming the queen after the exchange opens up the d-file for your rook, preparing a swift redeployment to a more active square and potentially initiating a kingside attack by freeing your own queen for offensive maneuvers, while simultaneously forcing black's less developed pieces to reconsider their central occupation. After the forced exchange on d1, black's bishop retreats to f8, aiming to re-establish defensive support for the kingside. This position marks a critical juncture. White has secured a slight initiative with active pieces and a potential queenside pawn majority, while black has a compact structure but lacks immediate counterplay, creating a subtle spatial imbalance that white will seek to exploit. Forging a central spearhead, this knight's repositioning aims to reinforce the d4 pawn and prepare a potential kingside offensive, simultaneously bolstering the overall white pawn structure. The queen retreats, a curious decision after sacrificing it so boldly, now seeking refuge on a square that feels somewhat exposed and lacks immediate attacking potential, potentially allowing white to consolidate its positional advantages and initiate a more coordinated kingside assault. Instantly seizing the initiative, this knight leap disrupts black's delicate pawn structure and the vulnerable d6 square, threatening to unravel any further attempts at central consolidation. White sacrifices a tempo in pawn pushing for a decisive piece activation, preparing to dominate the open files and create threats on the kingside. The queen's repositioning aims to create new attacking possibilities and contest control of the c-file, though it potentially leaves the monarch slightly less defended by pawns. The bishop retreats to the relative safety of f1, abandoning the ambitious outpost on a5 and signaling a shift in white's intentions. This retreat isn't about immediate attack, but rather a repositioning for a more patient, long-term struggle, aiming to solidify white's pawn structure and prepare for a potential kingside expansion once the center stabilizes. Notice how the queen on a3 has become somewhat exposed after the queen exchange, and this move implicitly acknowledges that white wants to avoid immediate tactical skirmishes and instead focus on building a more robust position before committing further. Attempting to disrupt the queenside pawn structure, this maneuver aims to create immediate counterplay and potentially open lines for black's pieces. However, it neglects the developing threat on the kingside and allows white's pieces to coordinate further, potentially leading to a dangerous pawn storm or positional squeeze on the other flank. The central control white has established now feels even more pronounced with this commitment of black's queenside pawns. Re-establishing central influence and preparing for potential pawn advances, this knight repositions to bolster the center, anticipating a possible pawn push on the kingside or a regrouping to support the queenside structure, which currently feels a bit strained by the doubled pawns. The queen's abrupt repositioning to a3 seems to be a desperate attempt to find active squares, but it leaves her vulnerable to white's active pieces and potentially exposed to tactical skirmishes. Repositioning the knight to **nb3* aims to re-establish pressure on the queenside, specifically targeting the b5 pawn and potentially creating a fork on c5 or a3. This maneuver acknowledges the recent loss of tempo and prepares for potential queenside expansion or tactical skirmishes. It demonstrates a willingness to adapt after black's persistent queen incursions, seeking to regain initiative and fortify key squares. The knight's new outpost could prove disruptive, forcing black to commit resources to its defense. Black's knight finds an active square, eyeing the queenside majority and potentially disrupting white's pieces with its influence on c5. Suddenly, the queenside opens up, creating a complex battlefield where white seizes the opportunity to dismantle black's pawn structure and expose their king's flank. The immediate aftermath of this pawn capture opens a precarious pathway for the black queen, potentially luring her into an exposed position ripe for tactical exploitation by the bishop and knight. The knight's repositioning initiates a sharp battle for control over the central squares and opens up avenues for further piece activity, creating immediate tactical possibilities. Black's queen, having danced around the queenside, now aims to disrupt white's central pawn structure, eyeing weaknesses created by the capture of the b-pawn and the exposed king. Unlocking the central files with that knight's advance presents a fascinating geometric challenge. The pawn structure is about to undergo a seismic shift. The knight's retreat, forced by the bishop's aggressive thrust, now presents a critical decision. Does black prioritize recapturing the pawn to equalize material, or does the queen reposition itself to a more active square, potentially creating counterplay on the queen side? This choice will significantly influence the unfolding strategic landscape. Suddenly, a critical repositioning of the white queen offers a dynamic challenge, aiming to exploit black's slightly loose pawn structure on the queen side and potentially create threats against the king. A bold commitment to re-establishing pressure on the queen side, though it risks isolation for the rook. Asserting dominance on the queen side, this advance aims to restrict black's pieces and begin a slow squeeze, potentially creating weaknesses on the c-file or the b-pawn. Black gambles on a kingside assault, injecting immediate chaos into what was a relatively placid strategic battle by threatening the white monarch with the bishop and knight coordination. White seizes the opportunity to simplify and gain an immediate material advantage, clearing the way for a decisive attack. Black desperately seeks to complicate matters, aiming to tangle white's pieces and avoid the stark positional disadvantage. The rook's repositioning to the contested central file offers a glimmer of counterplay, threatening to disrupt white's material superiority if white isn't vigilant. This maneuver, while risky, reflects a player unwilling to concede without a fight, gambling on the possibility of creating tactical imbalances to offset their structural weaknesses. The knight repositions to a more active square, ready to harass black's queenside pawn structure and potentially pivot to control the vital central squares now that the exchange has simplified the position significantly. A daring decision to snatch that pawn, inviting a cascade of complications. Black gambles on disrupting white's imposing pawn structure for immediate material gain, hoping to unravel the position before white's pieces can truly consolidate their attacking potential. A high-stakes maneuver that will demand precise defense and potentially create fascinating counterplay if white isn't careful. Stabilizing the knight on e1 opens up options for regrouping and reinforcing potentially weak squares, preparing to contest the crucial b-file which has become a central battleground. Black seeks to solidify their queenside presence and prepare a pawn push to contest the open files.